Earlier, we spoke to Gordon Chang, who cast doubt on whether Xi is still in control of the military in China. Watch this.
We don't know the answer to that, but we also pretty sure from what little evidence exists that Xi Jinping was not controlling the military last year when a number of his loyalists were purged. So really what we have is a chaotic situation. People are saying that Zhang is no longer in custody. You know, his removal is not going to be taken lying down by other officers.
And joining me now is a former Pentagon official, Brent Sadler. Brent, in your opinion, is the leadership in Beijing unstable?
No, I would not go that far, and there's not enough indications that that's the fact. And to look at the military activities that are still ongoing in the East and South China Sea, the engagements of their foreign affairs across the world at the same time are the indicators to look at. Of course, trying to get a peek inside what's going on inside the inner sanctums of Xi Jinping's, network of thought leaders is very hard, if not impossible, to do. But there's not enough there to say that we're on imminent purges coming, more purges coming, perhaps, but not imminent collapse or, I guess, turmoil.
But if the military has its top general taken away and several others just taken away, is China's military capable of mounting an invasion of Taiwan?
I would certainly not rule it out. It certainly doesn't mean it's less likely that they're going through the purges, and quite to the contrary, could make it more likely. But again, it's still too early to figure out exactly what the intent and what is the direction. If the past is prelude, what Xi Jinping is doing under the guise of corruption, as Gordon Chang mentioned, is focusing in on a party discipline. And that it's important to remind everyone that unlike the United States and most countries in the world, in the communist regime, the military serves the political party, the Chinese Communist Party. At the top of that is the Secretary General, Xi Jinping. So his dictates still hold supreme to what the military does or doesn't do. And there's nothing to really question that in significant form yet, what we're seeing on the street, and certainly by the military operations.
Change the subject for a moment. President Trump told Axios that Iran wants to cut a deal. We have, after all, sent that big armada to the Middle East, putting some pressure on. Officials say any deal will have to include the removal of enriched uranium, plus a cap on Iran's stockpile of long-range missiles. Is that the kind of deal that would satisfy President Trump? I can't see the mullahs agreeing to that.
It's hard to connect the dots on that one. I mean, the nature of this regime in Tehran is the real problem. They're murderous. They support terrorists across the world. They have American blood on their hands. And right now they're accused of killing well over 30,000 of their own countrymen and have 20,000 in jail of imminent execution. And that, after all, is what President Trump mentioned a couple weeks ago would trigger an attack, as if the Iranian regime starts executing these protesters. And so I think the focus, the main thing right now is trying to ensure that the regime doesn't continue to crack down on these protesters as an opportunity, hopefully, to change the nature and allowing the Iranian people to change the nature of that regime, most importantly. And certainly, an aircraft carrier strike group is certainly a compelling case to make to enter into negotiations from Tehran's side.
If you can believe anything they ever say. Brent Sadler, thank you very much for joining us, Brent. We always appreciate it. Thank you.